The COVID-19 outbreak was unexpected. The world was faced with a pandemic, unable to neither prevent nor prepare for it.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
COVID-19 has not only invaded our bodies, but has also infiltrated everywhere, into every system constituting our world. Links of society were severed. Many countries shut down their borders, and the economy shook according to how COVID-19 progressed. Now the world is saying that in entering into the new era, we should remodel our ways and perspectives from before the pandemic. A post-COVID era, foreseen by 3 of the world's leading experts. In this new normal that COVID-19 will create, what changes await us? And what should we prepare for the future? The first prevention method to stop the spread of the virus was to stop human contact. However, amidst the terror of a new contagion, people started to fall into chaos and started to explicitly express discord, distrust, and hate. However, sociologist Sam Richards calls this era the greatest sociological experiment that we could have ever imagined.
We had never really had the real deal that a pandemic that affected the entire world. You have to go through this one time before you can really know what's going to happen and how things are going to unfold.
Sam Richards, a sociologist who observes the sociological phenomena of our era and speaks empathy that transcends race, gender, and culture.
I am Dr. Samuel Richards. I am a teaching professor of sociology at Penn State University.
Experimenting with new perspectives and pitching novel ideas to our society, Sam describes the current phenomenon as rather interesting.
We've never had to do it before, so it's a whole new game for us, and we don't know what the rules are and who's going to, what countries or what companies are going to sink or are going to swim, and how things are going to fall apart in ways that we can't predict and we don't know. It's so deeply fascinating and problematic and troublesome, and a problem worth solving that it's hard for me to wrap my thoughts around it. Every day it was something new. So, to start with, know that the things that we're most familiar with are the things right around us. So there are people who think like us, who look like us, who act like us, people of our groups or of our tribes, people of our families. The further we move out from those particular groups, the easier it is to see people as the other. And now you've got this pandemic coming along. Here in the United States, it never really hit in the same way. So now you've got this invisible enemy that could kill us, any of us, at any moment. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how it spread. We're getting lots of misinformation from people. The further we go away from the small group around us, the easier it is to develop some kind of fear, some kind of hate. And so then we start pointing fingers. And once we start pointing fingers, then the hate begins to come out. You're the cause. You're the problem. And for the first months, we didn't understand. People didn't understand how this was being transmitted, and how easily it was being transmitted. This is really going to create a lot of fear among people. So I'm going to point fingers and then blame somebody else. So if I can blame the virus on the gay and lesbian community, or if I can blame the virus on the Chinese community, or if I can blame it on left-handed people or blue-eyed people, I will do that. People are afraid. When people are afraid, they do some pretty awful things to one another. Yeah. Which is why, when we want to build support for a war or an invasion or something of that nature, we have to create fear. So this is what we always do. Every society does it. Build the fear of the other, and then the people will get behind you. Let's go back to the beginning of 2020. There's news coming in from all over the world about this virus. No one really understands it, but nonetheless it catches our imagination. So we grab onto these cases, and then we take these cases, whatever it is, the examples that we hear about, and they rise to some other kind of level of fear in our minds. Now we start to quickly feel out of control, not just in our own local community, but in the larger community. And then I realize the Koreans feel out of control. The Chinese are out of control. The Europeans are out of control. This virus took off in India, everywhere, and everybody is out of control. As a result of that, what do? Right? Well, I want to get control. So that means I got to find causality. That means I got to figure out who's causing this problem somewhere, not only around me, but around the entire world. And then I'm going to start to frame my argument or my idea according to, who is the cause of this. That's the genesis or the origin of this kind of hate, this lashing out of people anywhere and in any way. And this is exactly what we saw in every single country, and we will continue to see it. In this country, people were really blaming politicians, and people on one side of the political divide were blaming people on the other, and vice versa. And I suspect that was probably happening in lots of other places as well. For one to rise into power, they have to get the people to distrust the other side. And for that side to rise to power, they have to get people to distrust this other side, right? And it's less about truth, and it's much more about sowing the seeds of distrust. Well, now, that's very deep in the United States. In a recent Pew poll in the United States, 75% of Americans have the idea that the trust that Americans have of their government is declining, that about 65 or 70% of Americans feel like the trust that they have of other people is declining. Now, mind you, on top of that, when you don't trust other folks in this kind of environment, this is a problem. So on top of that, we've got a pandemic in which we don't know who has it. We don't know who's taking care of themselves. We don't know who might kill us. And so does this person have it? Does that person have it? So we don't trust one another, not just the government, but also we don't trust the government. The only way for us to really get this pandemic under control is to give power to entities larger than ourselves and say, listen, you're going to have to step in and take care of this. We need to have strong governments who have the power to step in and make decisions on behalf of everybody and force people to do the things that they really need to do, or we all go down. It's the problem of the commons, you see. We all have to be in this together, or we all go down. So here's the thing. I have this idea that the things that are coming at us, these pandemics that are not going to be so easily controlled, that are going to kill many more people, climate collapse, food insecurity, the likes of which we've never even imagined. These things are coming at us. The only way in which we as a human species are going to be able to solve these intractable, huge problems is for us to give power to larger organizations much bigger than ourselves. You know, when I think about different racial groups in the United States, what's important for people who don't study this like I do to remember is that it's a fallacy to imagine that, you know, black people and brown people in the United States are all poor. The issue is that black people, Hispanic people, and Native American people are more likely to be poor than white people, disproportionately speaking, more likely to be poor, which means earn less income, less likely to be insured, more likely to work in jobs where they have to engage other people during a pandemic, more likely to have pre-existing health conditions, which means they're more likely to suffer the effects of getting the virus. I think it's probably pretty true all over the world that certain jobs are more likely to lead to higher infection rates. And those would be the jobs in which people have to work side by side and have to communicate side by side. And also, mind you, certainly here, so that's true just in the nature of the job, but also in certain jobs, certainly what we in the United States would call blue-collar jobs, it's the population of people who are more likely to follow President Trump and less likely to believe that the virus is anything other than a hoax. And so we're going to see higher infection rates there. And, you know, here's another piece of this that matters. Because of the imbalance of income, wealth, power, insurance, et cetera, people who are less likely, who are at the lower end of the social and economic ladder, are, if they get sick, they're less likely to go somewhere to take care of things. Therefore, people wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And we know with this virus that the worst thing you can possibly do is wait. And by the time that you really can't breathe, it's already too late. And so this is another thing that we really saw and have continued to see. You know, so in the United States, we have this term that we use. It's called Latchkey Children. And that basically means kids who come home from school to an empty house, they go in the house, they turn the key, and they wait for their parents to come home. Now, we're seeing many more of those latchkey children now because there are a lot of parents who have to work outside the home who relied on the school for their during the day and the aftercare and so on. So we're seeing latchkey kids who are home all day, all by themselves. But I would think that we will find ways to solve those kinds of problems. Let's talk about the online gap issue for a second. The other thing, I suppose, is there's an egalitarian issue, right? That it's unequal. And that, you know, some students are, if you have faster internet, if you're more likely to own a computer. One thing, you know, we see, even here at Penn State, you know, we have students who don't have a computer at home. We sent them all home last March, and some people didn't have internet, and they don't have a computer. And they're taking classes off their phone. And I think this is a problem. So there has to be a sort of a greater equalization of resources. It's actually more common than not that schools are under-resourced and underfunded all over the world. I have spent a lot of time traveling around the world, in particular into a lot of poor countries, and I've been in schools that are literally nothing more than a tree and a piece of wood for a chalkboard, and then students sitting on the ground learning something. So the online gap, the technology gap, is probably less problematic, to be honest with you, than the standard educational gap that we see in the way school resources are distributed around the world. So because I can have a single iPad and I can have 4G connectivity and I can connect to the entire world as a student in rural Haiti or in Tanzania or in many other places where I could be. Whereas if I don't have a decent school and I don't have a teacher that can show up every single day, then I don't have any chance of getting any kind of education. When I think about the online education as it's being rolled out today, I think about the autonomy that people experience. I think about the ability to learn more quickly, to think more openly without being distracted. I think about the opportunity maybe to focus on the things that we really want to focus on, the opportunities to use technologies in the ways in which it really is meant to be used and not closed down. I think about the opportunity to have truly a global education. So imagine a system in which, on one day I go to class in, Indonesia, and on the next day I go to class in Nigeria, and on another day in Norway. And I think, wow, the opportunities are immense. Right now, we're in the middle of the greatest sociological experiment that we've ever could have imagined. We get to test the impact of social isolation on people's behavior, on their livelihoods, on their sense of purpose, on their sense of self, on their just sense of everything about them, right? Ultimately, on their happiness. So we have this Corona blue idea. People are on their screens and they're spending all this time. Well, you know what? We're still in the adjustment mode. It may be that people are going to learn how to do this screen work and they're going to figure it out and they're going to say, oh, you know what? I'm just so much happier learning here on the screen. I get a lot more done. It turns out the educational people study it in a way that we never have, and we say, you know what? The child grows faster. In 3 hours a day, this child can learn more and grow more and develop a greater sense of curiosity and awareness and understanding in those 3 hours than they would in 5 or 6 or in the Korean sense, 16 hours in the classroom and then after school learning, right? So it may be that down the road, in 20 years from now, we say, wow, we've remodeled all of education. And who's to say? I actually think that one thing we're going to learn through this pandemic is how to engage on video conferencing platforms. And we're going to use them more. We're going to travel less, we're going to engage more, we're going to learn how to feel connected with one another over the screens. I think we're only beginning to really get a sense of that. And I think we've never been tested as a society. We never had to, and we've never really been tested. But I think we're going to have the opportunity to do that, and we're going to discover some interesting things. It may be either A, that just being less social we find turns out to be really good, but it may be that this COVID-19 changes us entirely into a space or a people who say, you know what, I really enjoyed my time alone. I enjoyed not going to all of these places. So a lot of the activities that we used to do as a society kind of start to go away because people say, you know what, I enjoyed more time with my family, or I enjoyed more time at home by myself in the evenings. I didn't want to go out every evening. I don't want to shop all the time. Maybe I get on the internet and I have everything sent to my house because I don't want to go see anybody in a store. I'd rather just go hang out with my friends when I have an opportunity to do so and do nothing but talk to them. So there are all sorts of ways in which life could change for us. We need people to get along. This is the fundamental thing. You got to get along. We want a stable society. We want a society in which people feel good about it when they wake up in the morning and they move forward and they go to work and they come home and they get to the weekend and that they feel good about being alive. They have enough sense that they can be a little better tomorrow than they were today, and maybe their kids at least will be where they're at, right? That's what we want. How do we get that? It requires politicians to have the political will to pull the lever. But I also have this idea that something like global climate collapse might actually lead leaders in the world to say, you know what, we're going to need to figure this out or we're all going to go down. It's one big ship. It's not just a single government. Korea can't do it on its own. China can't do it on its own. The Philippines, Australia, Germany, the United States, we all have to do it as a collective unit because we are a globalized, interconnected world. And so when one doesn't come through, the other ones falter. It's really unsettling to interact with people in radically different ways than what we normally do, which is why I think it's difficult for a lot of people to travel outside their own culture and to be in a very, very different culture. So right now, what this pandemic is calling upon us to very quickly figure out how we're going to interact in these really kind of ambiguous and uncertain situations. So when we would normally shake hands, we don't shake hands, we find some other way around us. When we pass someone on the street, how far away do we go? And it's very unsettling to have to learn this and do this very quickly. It's certainly in some societies more so than others, what we need is to learn how to interact in situations that don't undermine all aspects or define all aspects of an interaction. So if I don't shake somebody's hand, it's really okay. There are ways in which we have to change the entire social system, right? Which means we don't come in direct contact with one another. When we ride in other people's cars, we ride in the back. When we pass each other on the streets, we do it in particular ways, right? We have markings on the sidewalks where there are all sorts of things. The social system and the cultural system in some ways are really fused because the social system is going to change as a result of the individual cultural variations that come into play as human beings interact with one another. I need to feel comfortable wearing a mask. In the beginning, I'm like, well, I can wear a mask, but I'm not comfortable. I am. I'm a sociologist. I travel the world. I can be comfortable in any situation under any circumstance because I've taught myself to do that. But the mask wearing was a new one for me, so I had to learn it. Say like, all right, let me get used to this. My ideal world post-COVID is one in which we found a sweet balance between communitarianism and individualism, between government control and individual freedom, such that as we move forward as a society, as we move forward to solve the intractable problems that are coming at us, we are able to do it without a great deal of struggle and strife. That's my ideal world. And the only way to achieve that world is to work together within nations and between nations. And the more we work together between nations, the more we see that would be my ideal world.
One thing is clear about the post-pandemic world. It will never be the same. However, under any circumstance, humanity has evolved, adapted, and flourished. In the post-COVID era, we will find a new balance in individuals, communities, and nations.
That's my ideal world. The only way to achieve that world is to work together within nations and between nations. And the more we work together between nations, the more we see my interests and mine, because they have their own interests in mind, and their interests are intimately linked to my interest, and mine intricately linked to theirs. And so we're all in this together. And so you know what? It's really probably a good idea.
The era post-COVID. We're hoping for a new and different way of building a society that is tighter and stronger than ever before. Ever since the Great Depression and the Second World War, COVID-19 has created the greatest economic crash in history. How will the world economy break through this crisis in the era of post-COVID? Next time, financial crisis expert Daniel Stelter explains what direction the world economy should take in a post-pandemic world.